Adolf Hitler, the ringmaster of the Holocaust and proponent of racial purity, developed an unusual and very intimate relationship with one Bernile Nienau, who was still largely unknown at this time of having Jewish heritage. She often called him uncle, he called her sweetheart. At his Bavarian retreat, they spent the years of wartime exchanging letters and posing for photographs together. But as Nazi racial laws intensified, Bernile's life became a volatile contradiction. This is the remarkable true story of the girl Hitler once hugged, then wiped from memory. It started on April 20, 1933, Hitler's 44th birthday. At his Alpine retreat, Haus Wachenfeld, in the peaceful Bavarian Alps, a few flattered fans had assembled. In their midst was 6-year-old Bernile Nienau, who shared the same birthday as Hitler. Her mother lightly brought up this coincidence, and Hitler was captivated. They were invited in. A photo was taken, the newly elected Chancellor of Germany, grinning alongside a blonde-haired, slender girl. That photo would soon be among the most widely distributed photographs in Nazi Germany. Why would a man obsessed with visions of racial purity take such a public fondness to a child whom he had just met? That photo of tenderness and innocence was soon grabbed by Hitler's personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann. Hoffmann snapped numerous photos of their meetings, which later appeared in official Nazi photo books. The pictures had a propaganda function, to present Hitler not as a brutal tyrant, but as a fatherly, people-friendly leader, particularly to children. Bernile, with her demure looks, was the ideal image of this pretense. Bernile and her mother saw Hitler several times over the course of the next few years. They wrote to him, and Bernile was publicly addressed as the Führer's child. She sent him little handmade presents. He in turn accepted her into a very carefully staged image campaign. But behind this warm tale of friendship was a sinister irony: Bernile had Jewish ancestry. Amazingly enough, Hitler was informed of this early on. His aides had warned him as far back as 1933 that Bernile's Jewish maternal grandmother rendered her a Jew under the racial laws the Nazi government would eventually enact. This made Bernile herself a Mischling, a person of mixed Jewish parentage, under the racial legislation the Nazi government would eventually enact. In Nazi parlance, she was officially non-Aryan. Yet Hitler let her into his inner circle, welcomed her to the public eye, and continued to correspond with her. Why did he make this exception? Was it ignorance, sentiment, or a deliberate contradiction? Whatever the reason, it did not last. As Nazi racial laws became tighter, the regime became more and more uneasy about the relationship. Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary and an ideologue, finally intervened. He cut off all contact between Bernile and Hitler. She and her mother were forbidden to return to the Berghof. The photographs once touted disappeared from subsequent publications. Hoffmann was even dissuaded from appearing in a photograph. What was left was an uncomfortable silence. The Nazi regime had attempted to scrub the contradiction that it had at one time supported. But letters, photographs, and memories persisted. And the question hung in the air: why had Hitler made an exception for a girl who, by his own laws, should have been kept out? This disturbing reality was not fully revealed until decades afterwards. In 2025, historians researching Hitler's own letters to Bernile established that he had willingly continued to have a relationship with Bernile while being entirely aware of her Jewish heritage. She had Jewish grandparents and was thus categorized under the Nuremberg laws as a second-degree Mischling. She was not entirely German under the law, although she looked it and was a Catholic. The 1935 Nuremberg laws designated Jewishness by ancestry rather than religion. Converts to Christianity did not escape this rule. Bernile's mother was classified as a first-degree Mischling and Bernile as a second-degree. This designation made her racially tainted in the eyes of the authorities. And yet Hitler still courted her. The paradox was glaring. Bernile, blonde and blue-eyed, resembled the Nazi ideal. Her public connection to Hitler was symbolically dangerous. As she became more popular, so did the threat that her heritage would be made public, subverting the Nazi racial mythology. In the end, the regime opted for silence. Bernile was wiped from the record, her pictures discreetly taken down, and her story hidden. But history does not forget. Her fleeting time in Hitler's life uncovers the profound hypocrisy at the center of the Nazi regime, and the cost in human lives of its inhuman ideology. Once expelled from Hitler's inner circle, Bernile and her mother went into hiding. They returned to Munich, where life became bleak. While she had once appeared with the most important man in Germany, Bernile was now an outcast. The same government that once welcomed her now acted as if she had never lived. Her tale, once used to boast as a propaganda jewel, was now a deadly liability. Although she was famous at such a young age, there was no safeguard from the increasing savagery of the Nazi regime. Bernile's Jewishness, once forgotten, now branded her and her family as targets for persecution. She was refused access to schools, social services, and even healthcare. The same laws against race, which had already taken rights away from millions, were now bearing down on her. By her early adolescence, Bernile lived in silence with fear. Sadly, her tale concludes not in triumph, but in agony. In 1943, Bernile Nienau succumbed to spinal polio at the age of 17. The girl who had been the Führer's child was buried in a humble grave, far from the Bavarian mountaintop where she had sat with Adolf Hitler. No official attention was given. No flowers from the Reich. The regime that had once adopted her forgot her with silence. Now, her tale is a grim reminder of Nazi ideology's contradictions and cruelty. Hitler, who advocated racial purity in all its forms, once let sentiment triumph over dogma, until it was no longer convenient. Bernile's existence and death reveal the shaky ground upon which a regime founded on hatred was based, and the innocent lives it claimed along the way. Bernile's tale is not a footnote of history, it is an eye that reflects the deadly strength of propaganda, the paradox of dictators, and human cost of ideology. She was a flawless icon of the Aryan ideal in the eyes of Hitler. But behind that facade was a reality too bothersome for the regime to endure. Her life teaches us how even the purest among us can be utilized, cast aside, and forgotten by dictators. Today, we honor Bernile, not as a pawn in history, but as a human being swept up by the current of one of the darkest moments of the 20th century.